Hi, how are ya? We've all got a story to tell, even if you don't have a chronic illness. For people with fibromyalgia, our stories are unique, just as they are in the general public. But my hope is that my story will give you hope and encouragement in some way or another. I'm still a work in progress, and my experience is my experience and can't be compared to yours. I hope it's a story of hope, and I'll go into as much detail as I feel comfortable sharing so that you get a picture of who I was and maybe a hint of who I am today, what my behaviors were like as a child, to teenager, to young adult, and finally adulthood. I'll, of course, share my diagnosis. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. So life is a journey. In my younger days, my parents were divorced when I was 5. I don't remember them being married or being together. I think my dad wasn't home much. When I was younger than 9 years old, I experienced trauma. I'm not going to talk about that here, but it was a traumatic experience for a young mind. So I did what we do and I pushed it to the back of my mind, never to think about it again. When I was young, probably 6 or 7, my brother and I were eating Lifesavers. Remember those candies? I guess they still make them. Well, his candy got stuck in the back of his throat and he couldn't breathe. He started choking. I screamed for my mom, and she tried to get it out by smacking him on the back. I ran behind a tree in our yard because he was on the front porch. And then I peeked around to see what was happening. I started praying that God would save my brother. I think Mom had taken us to church a few times, but how I knew to do that specifically, I'm not sure. We must have done it in church too. About that time, my older brother, he's 9 years older than me, came home. And he stuck a finger down my brother's throat, which caused him to throw up that lifesaver, and he was able to breathe. Now, we know today that that isn't the way to get out a candy that's stuck in your throat. I mean, because he could have lodged it down further into his throat. We didn't know about the Heimlich maneuver back then. But I knew from then on that God answered prayers. Now I realize that things could have gone very badly, and God might have had a different plan for my brother. But that's how my little mind worked. And to this day, I rarely eat candy like that. And if I do, I chomp on it into bits. In 3rd grade, I broke my arm. When the bell rang after recess was over to go back inside from the playground, I was walking in and a boy bumped into me. I think he was running. I don't think he meant to. And I fell and hit my arm on the curb right here. I didn't tell my teacher, and I sat through the whole day because that was morning recess. My arm began to swell, and I couldn't move it. Nobody noticed until I got into my mom's car after school, and she took one look at me and I began to cry. I guess I had held that in all day. She saw my arm and was horrified. So she drove me to the doctor's office and it was broken. I wore a cast all the way up to here. You remember the plaster cast? In 5th grade, we moved to a different city not far away. I was happy about it. A new life and new friends, because I hadn't really made friends with anyone from my perspective. There were a couple of other kids that I talked to, but nobody that I felt close to. I don't think I was good at being a friend, although I think kids liked me. I just didn't always reciprocate that feeling of friendship to others. I think I didn't know how. I wasn't mean or anything like that. Far from it. I was shy and I didn't know how to be a friend to anyone. I think I was also a little bit withdrawn from people too. Trust seemed to be a big issue for me, but I did make friends in the new school. And in the summer before my 7th grade, we called it junior high back then, we moved again. Same city, new school district, but making friends at this school was much harder. One time I went to my aunt's and got a splinter under my fingernail. The hospital emergency room didn't numb my finger, and I screamed and cried. And then they apologized to me and my mom when they realized how deep that splinter was. When they laid it on my finger, it went all the way back to here. That's crazy. So back to that new school. Since making friends wasn't easy for me, I really struggled in 7th grade. And I passed out in the lunch line, like totally out, and got carried to the nurse's office. My mom didn't remember that. Years later, I was talking to her about it, and she said, I don't remember that. Now, it would seem like the school would be required to call your parent, but I don't know. For years, I didn't pass out again until just before I got fibromyalgia. Now, I had many close calls. One time everything went completely black, and other times I just got dizzy, but not a complete faint. And then in the 8th grade, I met who was going to become my best friend. Actually, she introduced herself to me. I hadn't even noticed her. She said, we've got this class and this class together. Oh. I was a bit of a loner, I guess. But she didn't give up on me, and we were inseparable. Over time, I found my independence and met other friends, but it was always her that I could trust. At about 15, I sliced the bottom of my foot open on glass because I hated wearing shoes. I got a bunch of stitches that time. And then when I was 16, I was walking home from my first job. I walked through the parking lot of a department store, shopping center, and it was a great way to cut through to get to my house. There was a little trail at the back of that store that led to where I lived. And as I was walking through that parking lot, a guy in as I remember today, a white car, I'll explain that, pulled up next to me. He threw open the passenger door and he was doing some really nasty stuff in that car. Fight or flight kicked in, along with adrenaline, and I took off running into the store. I mean, I don't think I've ever run that fast or that hard. I was so frightened. I stood inside behind all the glass windows that you could see through out to the parking lot, looking for him. And I probably stood there for about 10 minutes. And that's when I decided it was safe to walk out and go home. It was about a 10-minute walk to my house. I don't think I really walked. I think I sprinted. And as soon as I saw my mom, I started to cry hysterically. When she got me calmed down, she called the police. I wasn't able to remember what he looked like, what color the car was, what kind of car. I knew it was a car. That's about it. Apparently, it wasn't the first report of something like that happening in our area or in that town. But I pushed that deep down, never to think about it again. Throughout my childhood and young teenage years, I tried to be a good girl, obey my mom, be a good student. I was always on the honor roll, but somewhere I got lost. I was about 16 and I became really mouthy. I think a lot of teenagers do. I felt lonely. I wanted to find a boy that would love me and wanted to be with me, possibly for the rest of my life. Now, don't get me wrong, I had many boyfriends. One that was, we dated for like a year and a half, but it never felt right. And after graduation, my best friend moved to Louisville, where she had family. I stayed with my mom. I chose beauty school because it was local and I didn't have to travel, be away from home, so it wasn't as scary. After beauty school, while working at my first job, I heard my coworkers talking about church. I wanted to go, but since they didn't invite me, I decided to ask if I could go. That was a switch from me being afraid of people to outright asking someone if I could go to church with them. After a few weeks of attending church, I gave my heart to Jesus. But I couldn't ask Jesus in my heart in front of all of those people. So when I got home, I went upstairs, sat on my bed, and asked him in my heart. I think I cried for 4 days. That experience was life-changing for me, and I never looked back. I got another splinter under a different nail when I was working at my second hairdressing job. This time they numbed me, and they were shocked that they didn't numb me the first time. I met my first husband at church. We dated for a year and got married. I was a big people pleaser, and that made it hard on my marriage from my perspective. More importantly, I didn't really know who I was. I mean, you've heard people say that, but that's how I felt at the time. I felt like the concept was just too far from my reach, and I suffered because of it. Our marriage suffered because of it. And not just because of that, but we had a lot of other issues. Some my fault, some not. 3 babies later, I found myself miserable in my marriage, not with my 3 babies. Irritable bowel started when I was pregnant with my first child, IBS-C. He aspirated at birth and was in intensive care for 4 days. I wouldn't leave the hospital. I refused, even though they said they wanted to release me. I don't know if they'll do that now. My second birth was over 12 hours long. I mean, active pain long. When they gave me Pitocin, it went quick after that. And then with my last, it was pretty normal, thankfully. I thought 2 children were enough, but God had other plans, and he was born on Thanksgiving Day. My doc said the big meal did it. At the age of 24, I had my first colonoscopy. I was so sick, rapidly losing weight, that I passed out after the colonoscopy and then threw up in the bathroom. They didn't really find anything wrong at that time. About 8 years into my marriage, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I saw a counselor for about 2.5 years and felt more like me, or the me that I thought I was. I hung in there with my marriage for almost 16 years. I never, ever, ever wanted to break up my family. It was the one rule that I had for myself: never break up the family. In the end, though, that's what I did. I traumatized my children, because if you keep a secret that long and hide it from yourself and from everyone else, when you do something that drastic and that suddenly, to them it was sudden, it's a shock. My mom understood. You see, I had filed once before, 8 years prior to that, but I decided at the time to hang in there and dropped it. At that time, that first time I filed, a couple of my friends, church friends, and we hung out together as families, gave me a call, one after the other. It's like they planned it. They told me I was sinning and that God wasn't happy with me and that what I was doing was wrong. That hurt me deeply. I mean, they didn't ask me why I filed, or if they did, I didn't trust them to talk about it. So I basically let them beat me up on the phone. So I dropped the divorce. We sold our house and we moved out in the country to start a new life. I put my heart into that, but it just didn't seem like anything ever changed. It was always the same. So then I filed divorce the second time, and I knew that I wasn't going to change my mind that time. But I watched my kids suffer, and that was the most difficult part for me. Their feelings mattered to me, but my own heartbreak was overwhelming. So after the divorce, I started going to a different church, and I started to heal. My kids were going to their dads on the weekends, and I missed them because during the week I was working full-time and going to college full-time. But as was my way, to give in to what other people need and want. For me, that was a really terrible time. But then I started to open up and live my life. I started to enjoy it and experience freedom. I don't think I'd ever felt freedom until then. I learned a lot about myself, and I learned to say what I felt. I stopped pushing things down. Almost 3 years after the divorce, I met my second husband, my current husband. By this time, I'm a chatterbox. I think working as a hairdresser helped me to learn to talk to people. But he was very quiet. So initially, I didn't really like him because he wouldn't converse with me. But my coworkers thought he was the bomb. They called him Mikey. And I started to see him through their eyes. I wasn't looking for another relationship because I had recently broken up with my boyfriend. I had a boyfriend for about a year after the divorce, but that didn't work out. And I figured that I needed me time. Well, after Mike and I started dating, it was in the fall. I was going out to my car to get to work. It's like 5:15 in the morning. And as I walked down the steps to the walkway to my car, I slipped on the icy steps. It was the first freezing day of fall. My hands were full, purse in one hand, lunch in the other. I wasn't able to grab hold of the handrails quick enough, and I literally bounced down those steps all the way down, 3 or 4 steps, until I hit the brick walkway. I almost passed out that time, but I just sat there still with my eyes closed. And then I realized my legs were tingly, so I was concerned about getting up too quick. So after sitting there for several minutes, I got up, excruciating pain. I walked to my car, drove to work, and managed to get out of the car and walk in, clock in, and do my job. I took itty bitty, teeny tiny little baby steps. It hurt so bad. My supervisor walked up to me and she said, "You're in pain, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, you need to get to the doctor or to the hospital." I think she heard through the grapevine that I had fallen that morning. And I said, "Well, I can't leave. I'll mess up my perfect attendance." And she said, "Well, then you come back here with me to my office, use my phone and call your doctor, and you get in as soon as you leave work today." I said, "Okay." So I scheduled that appointment. X-rays later, I had fractured my tailbone. I mean, that made sense, the kind of pain I was in. And he wanted me to take a week off work. I said, "I can't do that. I've got 3 kids to feed." So he wrote me a prescription for pain. I wasn't supposed to take them when I was at work, so I had to wait until I got home. I bought one of those donuts, they call them, cushiony pads. I cut this section out of the back part for my tailbone area, and that's how I got to work. Sat down to eat lunch and sat to study. While I was at work, fortunately, I had a standing job. So back to Mikey. We dated for about 2 years and we got married. I had just started my first professional job after graduating from college. It was like having a startup entrepreneurial position because my job was to start up that college location and get it on its feet, and then to grow that campus. It was a huge responsibility, but one I wanted to do. So our 2 younger children lived with us. My oldest had graduated high school and moved out. I got home from work late most evenings, sometimes after 6 p.m., and I would go in at 8. Long days. My daughter was very helpful around the house. My husband, he cooked the meals for supper. So we managed to make that time work. Then the end of my daughter's year of high school, she got pregnant. And when she told me, it was, at the time, it felt like the worst day of my life. Of course, as time went on, those feelings changed. I have a beautiful granddaughter out of it and 2 more granddaughters since then and 5 grandsons. But at the time, I was a mess. I didn't care what people thought. I cared what her life was going to be and that it was going to be harder for her in the future. She's a trooper. I don't know how she managed to live through my horrible behavior, but she did. I think, like me in my younger years, she pushed her feelings down. It probably took me a few months to stop being angry with her. And then I finally got to a place of acceptance that this is what life was going to be. I mean, I wasn't going to change it. And we worked on our future. She has a pretty good life now. While that was occurring, I set goals for myself at the office. I wanted to have our own building, not one we leased out with a bunch of other people, but our own building with the name on it. And then I started having fainting issues, like sudden passing out, hitting the floor, breaking objects on the way down. Not fun. My husband said, "You got to get this looked at, Pam. You got to stop ignoring it." I was diagnosed with neurocardiogenic syncope. It's also called vasovagal syncope. I hit my work goal and we were moving into our own building. That process was difficult. At the time, my administrative assistant was kind of difficult to get along with. And I'm the one who hired her, so I thought I had to endure. Kind of a frequent theme in my life, endurance. The moving process from that building into the next started to take a toll on my body. I mean, I'm assuming that's what it was because that's what was happening at that time. I was getting major stiff necks and pain in my neck and shoulders. And my boss at the time said to me, "I think you have fibromyalgia." I was like, that can't be true. But she was right. That was the beginning. It developed into more pain in more places. The stiffness made me feel like I was 80, and I was confused by it all. I'd always had a high pain tolerance, but then hip pain became intense, and that's when I finally went to the doctor. He thought I might have neuropathy since my mom had it, but the neurologist couldn't find anything. And he sent me to a rheumatologist. I was diagnosed with hip bursitis or trochanteric bursitis. I got shots in my hips. Never wanted to do that again. But I wasn't diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Oh, and I had problems with my wrists, tendonitis for years. And I didn't get treated for that at that time either. But I was diagnosed with an inflammatory arthritis, not rheumatoid, in both of my hands. I was taking Plaquenil and steroids, and I felt wonderful after about 6 months. But I was really confused as to what was wrong with me. It just didn't seem to explain all of my symptoms. So I switched doctors. It took me 4 months to get into my new doctor. And by that time, I was full-fledged fibromyalgia. And my prescriptions had run out from the previous doctor, so I was on no medication. That was 2008. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't move comfortably. I had pain all over, burning and shooting pain. It hurt to walk, bend, pick up things, sit too long, you name it. I felt it. It was exhausting. I fell asleep sitting upright in the chair in the doctor's office while I was waiting for her to come in. I was so tired. I'm very breath. I just didn't reciprocate. My mom didn't really remember, but and then when I was 16, it's also called vasovagal syncope. Vasovagal syncope. My goodness. I'd always had a high pain drop, but then